When you're out working the landscape, one of the things that'll often happen is you'll find a place that becomes special to you for some reason. We're in the grave site at the back of the Missionary Baptist Church in Cades Cove, and I'm going to photograph in just a minute a scene of some old dead trees and some gravestones with the snow scattered. But before I do that, I have a personal shot that I want to make, and we'll do this a lot. And I think I would encourage you, as you're out shooting, to start to photograph things that have meaning to you. There's a gravestone over here that says Elijah Oliver. Elijah Oliver was one of the settlers that lived here. I think he was one of the founders of this church that we're standing next to. I have a grandson named Elijah Fortney, and my son and his wife, Rhonda, in part named Elijah because of their love for this place and because of how special this is a place to them. Obviously that makes it special for me. So I'm going to make a quick shot. This is not an award-winning photograph, but I want to make this picture for them, showing this gravestone and this place that is hallowed to them. Now, having done that, I'll make one more just to make sure I've got everything I need. I can stay in the same location, slightly turn the tripod around, and I'm going to frame up another shot, which I think is going to be kind of interesting. And I've got it ready. Now what I'm doing is I'm doing some of the gravestones with some of the dead trees in the background. This time I've chosen to use a 24-70 lens, which is not near as wide as the one that we used when we did the photographs of lions. You remember that shot. This is a little less of a wide angle lens, so it's allowing me to narrow the angle of view in a little closer. And the reason for that is in the background of this shot, there is a bright sky above the trees. And I want to eliminate that from the shot. So I've made it tighter. I've come in on these two very distinct tombstones in the foreground, and then you can see many of the very old tombstones with their etchings on them in the background, and then the trees beyond that. This is the joy of doing this kind of work, coming out, being out in the outdoors, seeing interesting things and making photographs and working the subject until you get the photograph that you really want. And if you can go by a special place to your family, it makes it even better. One of the things that I'm attempting to do in this shot is get as much depth of field as possible so that the trees all the way in the background are sharp and the tombstones closest to me, which are only about 15 feet away, are sharp. So I've stopped the lens down to about f11 and I've focused a third of the way into the frame. Now, it's not a third of the way in terms of if we measured a third of the way in, but we want to get far enough into the frame so that that's area in the front's going to be sharp, but we hold sharpness in the background. Depth of field works kind of crazy. It's 2/3 of your sharpness is behind where you focus, 1/3 is in front of where you focus. That's why if you go a third in, everything from a third in back is going to be sharp, and then it should be sharp to infinity. And we use this technique for landscape photography a lot. In the old days, we had an actual scale on the lens that showed you where your f-stop settings would be for infinity and the closest focusing distance. And it was called hyperfocal distance. You could actually set it that way. Today, because the lenses are made differently, we don't have those scales anymore, but we can still guess, and for the most part, it works pretty well. While I was working on the photograph of the tombstones, I turned around to walk away, and here's a great lesson about the intimate landscape. Always look behind you, because you never know when you're going to see a shot that you really like. As I was turning to walk away, I looked at the side of the church and noticed that the very late light coming through the trees was right on the boards that had been painted over and over. There's a lot of texture. When we want to talk about texture and shapes, here's a great example. There was a window with reflections, wonderful shape, and there was wonderful texture in the paint on the church. So I simply turned the tripod around, same lens, same setup, and got a composition that I really liked and popped off a few shots. This is the kind of thing that you have to make yourself learn to be open to. When you're walking around doing landscape photography, take the time to take a deep breath and see things. There's lots of things out there to photograph, and you'll miss them if you're in a rush to get to the vehicle, if you're in a rush to get to the next location. But by simply observing as you walk around, you'll come upon some of the shots that you'll like the best. And honestly, I think later when I'm working on these images, I've got a feeling this is going to be one of my favorite images. The light was really nice, the shapes were good, there was nice texture, and it wasn't a difficult photograph to make, and I didn't even have to move the tripod very far, but it was worth doing. Now we're going to look inside the church and see if there's a shot there. We'll see what the light's doing for us. It's at a good angle, though it's not that strong, so we'll see what it looks like. I'm about to make an intimate landscape photograph that could have never been made before. And that's because today we have technology called HDR, high dynamic range. And what we do is we make several photographs, one stop apart, and then with special software, we can put those images together and we can have from the brightest area to the darkest area still holding detail. Now in the old days, when we shot film, we had about a 5-stop range. And if you couldn't fit your photograph into 5 stops, you were going to lose either highlights or shadows. In this particular scene, we're looking at windows where the light is lighting the trees outside, and yet we have very dark walls inside, and we have dark pews, and yet there's light coming through the window hitting the tops of the pews. Now, the goal here is to make a photograph where you can see some detail in the pews and still have detail out those windows. Like I say, that would have been impossible in the past. What I'm going to do is shoot a 9-stop bracket with HDR, and we're going to get a shot after we process it that has all the detailed information. You notice that the exposures are getting longer, and that's because we're getting more and more shadow detail. These longest exposures will allow us to show detail in the pews in areas that you couldn't see. Now in those shots, the windows are actually blinking black on the highlight indicator on the camera, which is telling us there's no detail at all in the windows. But in some of the shots where the windows are very dark and you can see detail, then this area inside is completely black. Well, that's what allows us to get all of that into one shot, and we call it HDR. And when you see the results, it's magical. And I'm tickled to death. My daughter, Catherine, was married in this church. So it's kind of fun for me to come back here and see this place again.